Hello everyone. Today we're diving into 4 unsolved missing persons cases from across Canada after a young woman would vanish from St. John's while traveling. The friend of a missing teen's father would turn out to have a disturbing past. An Indigenous man would last be seen leaving a family member's home, and a British national would vanish while backpacking across Canada. What happened to these people? And have you heard about their cases before? 21-year-old Jessica Heppner was one of 4 sisters, described as bright and intelligent. But sadly, that's all the information I could find on her. What we do know is that she would begin traveling with a man from Poland named Norbert Kaza. Norbert had been living in Ontario since 2015. First, Jessica went to BC, then Winnipeg, and then Halifax before arriving at her final destination. On May 25th of 2015, Jessica would land in St. John's, Newfoundland, where she was seen on surveillance going through security and then entering into the city. After arriving, she'd head to the Sheraton Hotel, located at 115 Cavendish Square in the downtown area. She only had a one-night stay booked there. At 1:28 p.m., Jessica would be caught on surveillance at a drugstore. The next day, on May 26th, Jessica would get in a taxi and travel to Topsail Road in the area of Paradise to meet a male friend at a home there. Afterwards, she had planned to take a taxi back to her hotel room where she had extended her stay for another night. But that's the last time Jessica would ever be seen, until May 29th, when Norbert would report her missing. It would turn out that he had flown back to Ontario alone and informed police he would not do a face-to-face interview. Instead, he had plans to travel to British Columbia, and then he was going to catch a flight to Dubai. He would, however, provide police with information where he thought Jessica was last meant to be. Police would head to Jessica's hotel room, and inside they would find 2 suitcases, a laptop, and her IDs. One suitcase was said to be nicely packed, and the other was all full of items that had been just thrown inside of it, basically. Keep in mind, this seems to have been days later, so I'm not sure how the hotel room was still how she had last left it. You'd think that the workers would have cleaned it all out for the next guest, but it seems like police were still able to access the room as she had left it, unless workers did clean it out and they just provided police with the items they found in it. I'm not too sure. But why would Jessica go somewhere else without taking her belongings? Authorities saying, quote, "There were some emails and some information on the laptop, but nothing relevant to our missing persons investigation, and nothing as a result could assist us in locating Jessica Heppner." End quote. At the beginning of June, Jessica's mother would arrive in St. John's to attempt to try to help find her missing daughter. She would end up handing out posters throughout the city and trying to get in contact with people, just letting everyone know if they knew anything to please contact the police. Despite her frequent traveling, Jessica's family insisted that she had never not been in contact with them. She was always in constant contact with them through Skype or other online platforms. Police would end up determining that Jessica had failed to return to pick up her belongings, and there was no flight records indicating she'd left the province. Jessica was also using 2 prepaid credit cards as well as a prepaid cell phone at the time. Police from the area of Surrey, a ceremonial county in southeast England, about an hour outside of London, would end up contacting the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. They had actually been contacted by a member of the public who had concerns about an individual staying with them at the time, along with another unrelated matter. And that person staying with them was Norbert Kaza. And he had actually denied to a roommate ever knowing Jessica Heppner, even though he had just spent a long period of time traveling with her. Authorities were also able to interview that man that Jessica had met up with on May 26th. However, he was not named as a suspect. Other witnesses would also place Jessica in the Paradise area that day. And sadly, it would also be determined that Jessica had been involved in the sex trade. I guess when you look at the facts that she had, prepaid credit cards, prepaid cell phones, it would also turn out she had a large history of traveling not only across Canada, but also across the world. She'd actually just recently been to Germany and back. It would turn out she also had outstanding warrants for property-related offenses in 2 provinces, but no criminal record in Newfoundland and Labrador. Sadly, it seems like she was caught up in something very, very scary. And this Norbert fella, in my opinion, just gives me some very, very bad vibes. What was up with him? Why did he report her missing but then flee the country? It's very strange. It makes me think that he was definitely involved, probably with the sex trade as well. Maybe he was a possible pimp, but that's just my opinion. In July of 2015, which was about 2 months after she was last seen, one of those prepaid credit cards ended up being used for a purchase in Germany. And a month later, Jessica's prepaid cell phone would end up being used in Ontario. Police also believe that the address associated with that prepaid cell phone was fake. No one's ever been able to figure out what any of that means. This case is so puzzling because police don't have any information to indicate that Jessica was met by foul play in St. John's, but then they also don't have any information that proves she wasn't. She was involved with a very high-risk lifestyle, it seems. She went and met up with a guy and then just vanished afterwards, and then her companion, who she was traveling with, flees the country. And then months later, her cars and her phone are used in different parts of the world. It's a very strange and a very scary case, and the fact that this case is not being talked about, I've never heard of it before until I stumbled across it. It's very scary. This is something that's happening out there. She was a very young woman still, caught up in something very dark, associating herself with individuals that didn't have her best interest in mind. And then for her to just vanish? Despite her lifestyle, she deserves to be found. It makes me wonder if someone kidnapped her or did something to her. Are those the people using her cards across the world? Could they have just given those items to other girls that are associated with this to be used? It makes me wonder if Norbert is involved with all of this as well into the sex trade. Is it possible that he did something to Jessica and then took those items and then gave them to other girls he may be associated with so that they could use them, and that's why they're popping up across the world? Especially in Germany, which is a place she had just been, it makes me wonder, does he or other people in this organization have other girls that they're sending to Germany as well as to Ontario and other places where they had sent Jessica? There seems to be a lot more to this, and it makes me wonder if it's more than the NRC can handle. But we do know it seems like this beautiful young woman was caught up in a very dark world. Jessica is described as standing 5'9" tall and weighing around 160 pounds with long blonde hair and green eyes. 14-year-old Madison Roy-Budreau was born January 19th of 2007 to her father Jason, but I couldn't find any information on her mother. She lived in Bathurst, New Brunswick, a city in northern New Brunswick with a population of around 12,000 people. Madison's favorite color was purple, and according to her friends, she was a happy-go-lucky girl, a big jokester who loved to sing, dance, and make people laugh. Madison's longtime childhood friend Alexa saying, quote, "She was a rebel, and I loved being a rebel with her. She always had fun, and she was never someone who was boring. Everybody knew her. Teachers knew her. Our whole entire town really knew Maddie. She was an outstanding person." End quote. On the morning of May 11th, 2021, Madison would leave for school. However, she would never return home that day. She would last be seen around 7:30 a.m. getting into a gray Ford Ranger pickup truck. Madison wouldn't be reported missing until 11:18 p.m. that night, after failing to return home from school and then no one being able to find her afterwards. By May 12th, police would locate the vehicle in question and continue surveillance until May 13th. This is when the driver would be arrested and police would seize the pickup truck. Now, it seems like police never officially released the name of the subject that owned that vehicle. However, they would then eventually release a timeline where they revealed a 42-year-old man named Stephen Lorette was arrested for a breach of a court order. And it would turn out that Stephen is a family friend of Madison's father, who he had known for 25 plus years. And it seems like Stephen may have been the one to pick up Madison that day, even though there was no plan in place for him to. Now, what's so scary about that is that Stephen was actually on trial for SA charges on a different girl. According to CBC, he's accused of breaching the conditions that he not be in the presence of females under the age of 18 unless he's accompanied by someone over 18 who is aware of the present investigation. That still doesn't seem safe to me. But alas, that present investigation involved the SA allegations involving a complainant under the age of 16. And according to court records, Stephen was charged in September of 2019 with SA and SA interference. Now, according to the criminal code, that latter offense refers to every person who, for a sexual purpose, touches directly or indirectly with a part of the body or with an object, any part of the body of a person under the age of 16 years. And that incident was said to have occurred between December 1st, 2018 and March 12th of 2019 at or near Petit Rocher. So I think we can put the accusations of 2 and 2 together here. Ground searches would be conducted in the areas of Bathurst and Middle River late into the fall, yet nothing was noted by law enforcement to have been found. But police must have found something, because it seems like they determined that Madison was taken from Bathurst to the Middle River area and was seen most likely alive after May 11th. Searchers would also spend several days near a quarry where the truck was believed to have been seen after Madison's disappearance. On May 16th, based off of information received, police would search a house and property in the local service district of South Tedagouche, west of Bathurst. Just 3 months after Madison was last seen, police would end up announcing that her case was now a homicide investigation. But despite that, police have never revealed what has led them to that conclusion, and from what I read, it seems like they also have never told the family. The family spokesperson, whose name is Maggie Levine, has told Global News, and I quote, "I think it's time. They need to let the family know, or at least give us some type of closure. They need to know." end quote. After releasing that they believed that Madison was no longer alive, police began searching waterways in the Middle River area. A walk would also be organized in 2021 to bring awareness to the case and to support the family. Sadly, it does seem like police believe Madison is no longer alive, and we have talked about a lot of cases in the past where children are abducted and they are not kept for very long afterwards. After the perpetrator gets what they want out of the child, they normally end their life, sadly, because they don't want the child to tell. And sadly, there was someone who was known to the father, who the father was known for decades, it seems, that has SA charges against children. This little girl most likely got into the vehicle with someone she trusted, someone she thought she knew. And if Madison is no longer with us, all we could hope for is that she didn't suffer. But her family does deserve answers. Let's take one more good look at Madison in case it sparks something in your memory. Madison is described as being 5'4" tall and weighing 119 pounds. She has brown eyes and brown hair. She was last seen wearing a gray sweater, a pair of camouflage-colored pants, and a pair of silver-colored shoes. 23-year-old Byron Watson was from the Nakanee Cree Nation. He was employed at the Maple Creek livestock auction barn and was always at work every day. He was said to be a happy-go-lucky person, always ready to lend a hand to anybody who needed it, and he was planning to go back to the oil fields the following January. On Friday, November 24th, 2023, Byron would attend his brother's hockey game to support him. By the end of the weekend, which was now Sunday, November 26th, Byron was last seen in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan, a town situated about 380 kilometers southwest of Regina, just off the Trans-Canada Highway and not far from the Alberta border or the Montana border. Byron was last seen at his aunt's home, which was located on Lonsdale Street, and he spent that day with family. His aunt, Frances Delorme, saying, quote, "It was a regular Sunday. He had no plans. He left the house saying he was going to peace out and that he would be back later, and he never returned home. We don't know where he might have gone or what happened to him." End quote. On November 30th, Byron's grandmother would attempt to report him missing. However, later that day, police would call her back saying that he wasn't missing and that he was actually last seen at a house in the Nakanee First Nation. But his grandmother thankfully wasn't satisfied by this, so she would end up having other family members go over to this individual's home, and when they got there, Byron wasn't there. It wouldn't be until the next day, on December 1st, that the Maple Creek RCMP would finally note Byron as missing. Police would search extensively for Byron around Maple Creek in Nakanee, involving both ground searches and use of drones. The search area covered approximately 170 square kilometers. His bank accounts would also be constantly watched by family. However, since his disappearance, they haven't been touched, which is, as we always say, a bad sign. Because if someone is going to go run off somewhere, they need access to funds somehow, to buy food, to travel, to buy shelter. It was also noted that Byron never picked up his final check from work. Despite efforts from the RCMP, Byron's family, and community members, no signs of him have been found. No evidence has been found. And in the midst of this very puzzling situation, the community would all come together to support his family. Maple Creek Mayor Michelle McKenzie saying, quote, "Somebody might have been missing for 24 hours and then they show up, but we have not had somebody that has gone missing without a trace. It affects the whole community and trickles down through everybody." End quote. In mid-December of 2023, police would end up finding surveillance footage that was captured in mid-December of that year with a person in it that they believe resembled Byron. However, when family ended up looking at this footage, they would end up telling police that they didn't think it was Byron at all, specifically due to the kind of clothing that this individual was wearing. Family and volunteers would also continue searching for Byron throughout that year as well, bringing in horses and ground searches after being granted permission to search private land. His Aunt Frances would say, quote, "Byron is loved, Byron is missed, and his life matters. We want him to come home. We want answers to his disappearance, and if anyone can tell us where he is, please come forward and let us know. As a family, we want our boy back, and since his disappearance, we have hung a red shirt that stays on the window representing that he is still missing." End quote.
It's now been 17 days since a Maple Creek man left his home, and no one has heard from him since.
Now the community is looking for help, hoping to find out what happened. Mick Favel reports.
Because at the end of the day, we want him home. We miss him. The family misses him.
An entire community is searching for one of their own. 23-year-old Byron Watson was last seen in Maple Creek the morning of November 26th. Since then, there have been numerous ground and drone searches in and around Maple Creek. The search involves local RCMP, family members, town residents, and the search area includes nearby Niigaaniit First Nation. They all agree this is a very uncommon situation.
Somebody might have been missing for 24 hours, and then they show up. But we have not had somebody that has gone missing without a trace. No, nothing's going on. So, it affects the whole community. It trickles down so everybody's wondering and worrying and how things are.
Watson's disappearance is extremely hard on his family, but they remain committed to finding him. They are using every method in their searches, including social media and monitoring it for any possible clues. His bank account is also being monitored. His last work check was picked up by his family and remains uncashed.
My nephew, he's only 3. He asks where his Uncle Barney is. How do we tell him? We don't know where he is.
So far, around 170 square kilometers have been searched, including the train tracks in and around the town.
Right now, without any leads, we really need someone to speak up. There has been a aforementioned reward of $5,000, but we really need tips. Someone knows something. This is a small, close-knit community. There's info out there and we need it.
For the time being, the search party will continue their work as they wait for any information which may lead to finding Watson.
It has been over a year now since Byron has disappeared, and there is still very little to no information as to what happened to him after leaving his aunt's home. This is definitely a puzzling one, and again, it's just one of those cases where not many people are going to look at this and cover it because it's so hard to cover because there is no information. But I think we need to continue to talk about cases like this and spread the word on them because they need to get out there because someone out there has to know something and maybe it'll land on the right eyes. Byron is described as standing 5 foot 8 inches tall and around 175 pounds. He has black hair and brown eyes. Investigators are asking anyone in Maple Creek who has surveillance footage from November 26, 2023 from the hours of 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and who has not previously provided it to Maple Creek RCMP to contact them. 20-year-old Charles KJ Horvath-Allan was born August 21st of 1968 to his parents Denise and Max, and was a Canadian-born British national. In 1989, Charles would travel from England to Canada to visit his father and godfather in Ontario. He then had plans to hike and backpack across Canada. It was something that he had always wanted to do. Explore, see the world, and challenge himself. And by May 3rd, he'd arrive in Kelowna, British Columbia, where he'd stay at local hostels, some homes of friends, but he'd eventually settle at the tiny tent town campsite and RV park, located at 3316 Lakeshore Road near Lake Okanagan. Unfortunately, this place no longer exists. He'd also register at various student employment agencies that month. Eventually, he'd land a job at Flintstones, the now long-defunct amusement park that was on Highway 95 in McCurdy Road. Charles had plans in August to travel to Hong Kong to meet up with his mom and stepfather to celebrate his 21st birthday and her 40th birthday. So on May 11th, Charles would end up sending a fax to his parents in England, but then after this, he failed to contact them again to arrange for her to buy tickets for their vacation. Charles would last be seen on March 26th when he'd cash a check at a bank in Orchard Park. Eventually, his family would grow worried as they lost contact with him, which back in the late 80s, all you really had was like home phones back then, pay phones. There wasn't really cell phones, so it's not like you could just text someone to see how they were doing. You wouldn't hear from people for a while, but in this case, his family began to grow worried pretty quickly. His mother, Denise, would end up calling the Kelowna detachment of the RCMP and ask for their help in locating her son because she was anxious after not receiving an expected call from him in May. However, it didn't seem like police were taking her very seriously because it wouldn't be until August 10th that Charles would be marked as missing, nearly 3 to 4 months after he was last seen. Now, the information on the timeline of when things took place is a little bit muddled because it seems like police weren't searching, but her family was, and Denise would begin making multiple trips from England to Canada trying to locate her son. Now, it seems like about a year after his disappearance, Denise would visit the campsite that Charles had been staying at. And because this information is so muddled, let me know down below if the timeline is off, but I tried to piece it together. The information was a little bit hard with this one. The manager at the campsite would end up giving Denise multiple items of Charles's, including a rosary, a tiny red paper Bible, and a leather strap from Charles's boot, which had apparently been kept in a shed for more than a year. The RCMP wouldn't actually launch a search in that campsite until July of 1990. Over a year after Charles was last seen, and only after Denise advised them that Charles had been at the tiny tent campsite. When the RCMP were there, they would end up retrieving multiple items of Charles's clothing, as well as a shaving bag from a resident that was living there. The manager would end up telling police that Charles's tent and other belongings, as well as personal photographs and his IDs, had been thrown away in the spring of 1990. Sadly, I think this is another one of those cases where the police botched the investigation, because his mother seemed to have called pretty concerned very soon on after he disappeared, or at least was last seen. But then it took police at least 3 months to even consider him a missing person, and then it took them a year to even search the last place he was known to be. But from the information, it seems like the campsite held his belongings for about a year and then threw them away. In March of 1992, Denise would take another trip back to Canada. Now, in a very strange turn of events, during this trip, she would end up receiving 2 letters that were brought to her by a taxi while she was staying at the Pandacy Inn Motel. Now, these anonymous letters would claim that Charles had partied at the tiny tent town with locals and had gotten into a fight where he was subsequently killed. His body was then dumped into Lake Okanagan. And another theory, a gang of bikers from the US stopped and stayed at Tiny Tent Town and partied on their way to the Falkland Stampede, and Charles was killed for a gang patch. Due to these letters, local volunteer divers would end up searching the lake for 3 days, and it wouldn't be until days 5 or 6 that the RCMP joined in on the search. So it seems like, truly, the RCMP just isn't really caring about Charles's disappearance. It's all up to volunteer searching, and then eventually, every time they're like, okay, I guess we'll join in. Around 10:17 a.m. on April 3rd, divers would end up recovering the remains of an elderly man that was thought to have unalived himself about 7 years prior, but Charles or any evidence was never found. In September of 1995, police would end up finding a decomposing body in the logging country outside of Kelowna. They would make the family wait 6 agonizing weeks before telling them that it wasn't Charles's body. By 2010, the Kelowna RCMP's Serious Crime Unit would declare Charles as deceased, despite not really having any evidence to do so. I think just so much time had passed that was just the conclusion at this point. Denise believes that her son was murdered in the summer of 1989. Denise saying, quote, "How and by what means, I don't know, but something terrible happened to him that prevented him from calling home. I want to know where his remains are. I want him to be laid to rest with his beloved Nana in Cambridge, England. The lives of my family have been devastated, surviving 31 years without answers. It's been like living on a roller coaster to hell. The torment, loss, and pain of a child missing is unimaginable, especially thousands of miles away from home, across the ocean, at the other side of the world. Regardless, one has to keep going, fighting for justice and truth. How can you not stop until you know the fate of your child? I always believe if I fought and worked hard enough, I would find the answers to my young son's demise. Yet I have not been successful, but my search for Charles will continue as long as I can stand, walk, and talk. I will continue to search for my young son until the day I die. I am fortunate there have been kind people along the way who have helped me. Sadly, it doesn't get easier. It just gets harder with each passing day. The long 31-year search for Charles has taken me to my physical, mental, and financial limits. Help is essential to ensure the search for Charles goes on. Having lived with Charles in Yorkshire for most of our lives, it is wonderful to receive the investigative support of the team at Leeds Beckett University and specialists at Locate International to continue the search for years to come. Their support has been invaluable to me and my family. I hope their work will grow to assist so many other families whose missing loved ones need to find their way home." End quote. Denise has been so dedicated to trying to find her son over the last few decades that she even went as far as selling her hair and her hair salon so that she could fund her trips from England to Canada, because it is expensive. Not only the flight, but then having to pay for hotels and food and just all of those travel expenses just to go there to search, because it seems like police aren't doing enough. She's also used funds to buy billboards to try to help spread the word about her missing son. This is a case that I have never heard before. She has tried so hard over the years to continue to spread the word about her son's disappearance, yet there are no answers. It's so frustrating. I can't imagine. Since Charles's disappearance, his father, godfathers, and grandparents have all died without answers. And from what I've seen, Denise's last trip to Canada was around 2018 due to her increasing health issues and the financial burden of flying back and forth to Canada from England. As of 2020, Charles had legally been declared dead by the UK's High Court. But sadly, what happened to Charles still remains a mystery. Charles is described as standing 6 feet tall, weighing 175 pounds, with dark brown eyes and hair. He also had a skull tattoo on his right arm. What happened to Jessica, Madison, Byron, and Charles? Each one of their cases has very little information and hardly any answers. So if you know something, please say something. Please share out this video. Please share out their missing persons flyers. Let's help spread the word on these smaller cases that aren't getting enough attention. These 4 need to be brought home. These 4 need justice, and their families need answers. I'll have the information for each case down below for the authorities that you can contact for them. Do you know any more information on these cases that I didn't include here today? I'll be in the comment section chatting with you all. And what do you think happened? My heart goes out to all of their families. It's the holiday season as I'm posting this video, so happy holidays to all of you. Please hug your loved ones and appreciate that they're still around, because some people are out there missing theirs. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.